Hello, and welcome to Making Sense of It. I am Mona Duncan, your moderator, and this program is brought to you by the Glasser Institute for Choice Theory, and it is our gift to you. Each week, we have a certified member share their insights and outworking of the theory of choice theory, and it's always very enlightening and helps you to see the simplicity, but yet the depth of it. So today's speaker is Robert Martin, and he is a author, and he is on his book is entitled, well, his topic today is on helping students to review and connect so that they are learning more. So welcome everyone here, and Robert, we're ready for you to take us away.
Okay, thank you. So what we have to do here is share screen. And then move the Zoom. And then, okay. And then I need to move everybody out of the way so I can see what's, okay, good.
You're showing it really well for us, so go for it.
Okay, great, okay. Well, hello, everybody. I'm gonna start my timer. This will be about 20 minutes. I'm Robert Martin, and this is the 9th in our series on how to help students achieve and do well, including on national testing and high stakes testing that teachers are so concerned about. So today we're going to be focused on helping students learn through practice and revision. So the first big task that we have is to convince ourselves that everything that students do is practicing something, even if it's just looking at us and pretending to listen, but really daydreaming, or pretending to work when they have at their desks, but really they're not doing much. Okay, and so we're always practicing something. The second is, our big task is to design activities that involve students in practicing big ideas and key skills. And the key thing that I try to emphasize every session is that you always want to go for the low-hanging fruit. We're not talking about making big, huge systematic changes. We're thinking about having an idea in mind that we want to keep in mind as we go through the semester. And it's like, well, this semester I'm going to focus on this idea, whatever it happens to be. The big idea is to change small things. And if you change the right small things, then magic is going to happen. It can happen, and it will happen. The key practice that we're talking about is to always observe and study what's happening in your classroom, or if you're a parent, what's happening with your students. Because when you observe, it gives you information about small changes that you can make. So part one, I'm going to talk a little bit about what small change can I make that will increase learning and achievement. And we see Albert here, Albert Einstein here, because this is not easy stuff. Nobody can tell you what to do. You kind of have to figure it out for yourself, and that's a really tough one. So for each lesson, you need to identify what big key idea and key skill do the students need to learn. And then for each lesson, where do the students need practice? And then finally, how should they practice? And we're going to go into how to do that. So the two choices that you have are always, well, am I going to cover all the material? And maybe it's just going to be an inch wide, deep and a mile wide, or am I going to practice key skills using big ideas to learn materials in depth? And you always want to do both of these, but sometimes it's not possible. So you're always having to make choices as to what's going to work the best to get achievement. So let's just talk about, we can remind ourselves that students learn what they do, not so much what the teacher does, but what they do. So my example here is my friend and colleague and former student, Barry Crook, who's a very successful middle school science teacher. And I can remember one time visiting his class, and he had all of his middle school students out in front of the school, and they were collecting data. They had marked out a square yard of grass, and different groups had their own square yard, and they were counting what was in there: blades of grass, little insects, different kinds of weeds, et cetera, et cetera. Now, occasionally, of course, this was very visible. He had been at different schools. The principal would come out and say, gee, you know, I'm really concerned, doing this off to the side, of course, I'm really concerned about your students because it's like they really need to be covering material. And he would always say, they're going to trust me, this will work. At the end of the year, their scores on the national test are going to be as high or higher than other classes in the district. And they always were. So what he was doing worked. So one of the things we can do is to just think about ourselves as coaches. Like, one of the roles of a teacher is to be a coach. And I think that being a coach is maybe the big one. So as my colleague and biologist friend and partner likes to say, all good teaching is coaching. And she was actually working teaching science at a community college, and she had a lot of material to cover, and it was difficult material. So this worked for her. And she'd also taught in high school and middle school as well. So she found that this worked. So the first thing we have to do is to pick some of the skills that are most appropriate for practice in processing the information, the big ideas. What are the key skills that they need to be practicing? Well, there are dozens of these, but just to give you a few examples: describe, explain, generate questions for the teacher, develop graphic organizers. Now, these are things ordinarily the teacher does, ordinarily things that we do. But when you, to the extent that you have the students do them, then they're getting the practice. The thing is, you don't have time to do this on everything. It needs to be only those things that they need practice on. So how do we do that? So let's talk a little about preparing for practice. So the first thing is we need to observe to find out, what don't students understand? And then have conversations to find out, what don't students understand? And then evaluate student work to find out, what don't students understand? And these are all things we tend to do anyway, but often we do them because, well, I have to grade, I need to talk to students, to have a relationship with them, and that's all great. But the point is that all these activities should always be done with the idea in mind. I'm trying to understand the students, trying to find out, what is it they don't understand? And this also gives you an opportunity to follow all the wonderful things that Glasser says about making friends with the students and realizing, no, I'm not taking away time from teaching. This is part of teaching because I'm always trying to understand, as I get to know them, as I get to be friends with them, what are they doing where they're not understanding? Okay. So some guidelines for practice. Well, what we see here on our right is somebody getting some coaching in a physical activity. Now, the thing about mental activities, of course, they all take place in the head. They're much more difficult, which is why we need to do the observing, the conversations, and the evaluating so that we're understanding. something that's really, really difficult. So we need to identify what are the key skills that students need to practice, what are the big ideas that students aren't getting, and therefore they need to practice those ideas. Then another thing is we need to connect practice to the students' worlds. We don't need to teach a different lesson to every student, but we do need to relate the material to familiar students for the students' relevant examples, and then to provide new experiences through models or whatever kind of material you want to bring in. I like to give the example of a friend of mine who is teaching engineering in South Africa. Now he's teaching at a college level, but his students in South Africa are almost all students of color. They're all coming from very different backgrounds from the backgrounds that are assumed by the textbooks. The textbooks are all European textbooks. They all expect experiences and high school experiences that are relevant to what's in the textbook. So by him getting to know his students, he was able to, because these are bright students, he was able to get to relate the material and to have them practice figuring out how this relates to what they know, to what their experiences are. And we have diverse classrooms, so this is what we need to be able to do. We always wanted to connect to the students' worlds. And then we want to have them practice just a little tiny bit beyond their current level of mastery. So as a counseling psychologist and an evaluating psychologist, my job was basically, I worked with students basically K through 12. And the two kinds of students that they bring you and they say, here, fix this kid. He isn't doing his work, or he isn't getting along with the other kids, or with the teacher, or both. And so I would have kids who often had problems with math, and it was like they had given up. And so the first thing we might do, and maybe I'm talking here with a student in 3rd or 4th or 5th grade, it's like, well, can you count by twos? It's like, yeah, I think I can do that. Well, let's try that. Let me hear you do that. 2, 4, 6. And I would encourage them. We would keep going until they reached 100. And then I would say, wow, you can do this to 100. That's really quite amazing. I think you know more about math than you think you do. And they would look at me very puzzled, and it would be like, well, yes, I guess I do. So my job as a counselor was tutoring them with in the context of helping them understand is I can learn, I can do things. Counting by twos was pretty easy for them, but they'd never done it by up to 100. If I had a little more advanced student, maybe a 6th grader, we would say, well, can you do this by 3s? And it would be like 3, 6, and they'd have to think about it. And I would say, well, gee, that's your times tables. You know your times tables, your 2s and your 3s. So that's great. So I was just having them practice a little bit beyond their level of mastery. And that's so important, because if it's a little, if they're stretching, they're having to think, and that's what you want them. You don't want them just be going through the motions. You want them to be thinking about what it is that they have to do. And if the material's too easy, they just get bored. And by the way, I've worked working with adults as well. I've worked with supervisors out in the field, or working at factories and so on. I've worked at a prison, and it's, they're the same. They're not any different. You want to take them a little beyond, but not much beyond their current level. Otherwise they get bored. So when you have practice, when you figure out, well, what can we practice? Now that you know what they need to practice, what can I practice? You tend to want to do distributed practice, which is just short periods of practice. As one of my teachers used to say, 10 minutes a day is better than an hour. I think he actually said 2 hours on Sunday. Now, sometimes if you have them working on projects, you need massed practice where they're trying to put together a product or performance. I've spent time with third graders, a whole class of third graders, where in this school, the third graders, and in fact, every grade, they're doing research and making presentations in PowerPoint to give to their fellow classmates on whatever topic. I think that particular day they were researching, and each of them had an animal, and they were learning a lot about doing this. And they were really good, by the way, on PowerPoint. These are third graders. But when you do that, you still want to break it down into chunks. So whether you're using distributed practice or mass practice, you want to have chunks, because chunks make it difficult practice manageable and easy. And of course, even Olympic trainers, that's what they're doing with the kids that they're training. So how long should a chunk be? Well, hey, I've worked, as I say, with kindergartners up through senior high school and college and adults, and it's like it's as long as the students use the time productively. And often that's 5-10 minutes. Sometimes it might be 15 or 20. Usually it tends to be a shorter time. So one way of chunking is to work in passes, where you divide a larger project into a series of passes. Each time you go around, then the students complete one task. Sometimes these tasks can be done within a single period. Sometimes you do break it up over a series of days. So let's look at some example. Here's an example of writing in passes, and you could make this much more. You could have many more passes than what I have here, or fewer, just depending on what the situation is. So let's just go through this a little bit. So the basic thing is, and this, you don't say, okay, everybody take out a piece of paper and write a page on whatever it is, or write a story on such and such, because some of them will do it. Probably you could have done it when you were in class, when you were a third grader, a fifth grader, a high school student, but lots will not. So you need to take them through these steps. So pass one. Okay, we're just going to take 5 minutes to brainstorm and record ideas. And we're going to take maybe 10-15 minutes to write a rough draft just on what you have. And then we're going to put that aside for a day or two, because they're not really ready. They need to come to it fresh. And then maybe you're going to have them read papers to each other, or have them just read each other's paper, and then ask for suggestions. It's like, well, what do you think I should put it? What should I add to this? And they'll be able to do this. You have to train them to only make positive. We're not being critical. We're not being negative. It's like, oh, well, what could I do to make this better? And then they're going to make a final draft. Then they're going to turn it in, you're going to grade it, and then you're going to return it. And maybe you're going to return it on another day, of course. And then you're going to have them revise it, because you will have not only graded it but by evaluating it, you will have figured out what is it they need to practice. So when they revise this, then they will be practicing the things that each of them needs to practice the most. That was always a big thing with Glasser, is him saying, it's like, you need to let students do it until they get it right. You need to let them do it until they can get an A. You need to let them do it until it's very, very good, until it's quality. So you can do this working in passes, not just in writing, but in lots of other areas, in history, of course, music, math, sports, reading, art, you name it. We don't always think of things like history, for example, because that's It's like, well, that's something where I just have to lecture. It's like, well, no, you can go beyond that, because in history, there are always big ideas and there are always key skills that students need when they take a test, particularly a high stakes test. They need to read and think about, and those are key skills. And then they need to understand the main ideas, so that however it is that what they're reading for the questions, that they can understand and then make a good choice as to what the correct answer is. Okay, to summarize, this is a kind of little repeat from the beginning. We need to convince, because this is so important, we need to convince ourselves that everything students do is practicing something, so that we're going down the practice road, not just the lecture road. And we need to design activities that are going to involve them in practice. We need to break the practice into chunks, and then we need to continually observe and monitor students. And then finally, like the industrious ant, we need to challenge students so we make them think, that they're not just going through the rote motions. If you'd like a free copy of some of the materials from chapter 1 of the book from which this is taken, just give me an email at rmartinmusic@icloud.com. The publishers are letting me do this, even though it's copyrighted material. And all the main ideas are there in that first chapter. And I'll also send you material if you happen to be interested in the book on how to get the material at a discount. Okay, well.
All right, Robert, that was very, it covered a lot of area in a short time, and with good little passes, good little steps. So what I'm hearing from almost everything you say is that you are teaching everyone to practice with intention.
Yes, and your practice with intention, and the intention you have in mind is, I'm trying to learn as much as teach. I'm trying to learn what's going on inside their minds. What is it they're understanding? What aren't they understanding?
So you're intending them to go deeper as well as you, the teacher.
Because you know what to do. And this is why you need to be super prepared in what you do, so that you are so well prepared that you can think about, you can be observing how students are responding to what you're having them do. Or, hey, we all have to do some talking. Are they listening to me? What are they getting? What aren't they getting?
And then I really appreciated the smooth way that you slipped in there to help the student to go beyond their current level of mastery. To
Right.
help them acknowledge and see what they're already good at, and how with just a little bit of energy they can go beyond that.
Exactly. Yes. This is Glasser's idea of, you want to work towards quality. Not just, you don't want to just be, okay, I did what the teacher asked. It's like, we're trying for quality here.
And in the process of that, do you bring that quality to the student? Do you consider this to be quality?
I consider that when you're doing quality, when you're super prepared, so prepared that you can be observing, and then whatever you're designing for the students, that's helping them, because they're the ones who have to produce the quality. You can't do it for them, but you can prepare the way.
And so it kind of sounds like your bottom line is that sage advice from your friend of 10 minutes a day is better than 2 hours on Sunday.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's those small steps, those practice. And practice does, sometimes it may make for more perfection, but it definitely makes permanent. So thank you very, very much. And we'll go ahead and thank all of you that are watching currently, and stay tuned, and we'll have one-on-one chat with you and Robert. So
And
thanks
thank you
for being
for
here.
thank you for the invitation.
Yes, and many blessings.